Have you ever felt like you have nothing left to offer the world? That your story has reached its end? Wait, because what you're about to hear will break your soul and then rebuild it in a way you never imagined. This is the true story of a 70-year-old woman who decided to end everything at a bus stop in the rain, and of a single father who stopped when no one else would. What happened next? Well, it changed 3 lives forever. It was almost midnight on a cold, rainy November night. Marcus Reed was driving his beat-up pickup truck home after a grueling shift. The windshield wipers screeched against the glass as the rain poured harder and harder. On the dashboard, the clock read 11:47 p.m. Marcus just wanted to get home, hug his twin daughters and rest. But then he saw her. There she was. An elderly woman hunched in her wheelchair beside a barely lit bus stop. Her gray hair was drenched, her body trembling under a tattered coat that had clearly seen better days. Something tightened in Marcus's chest. Every fiber of his being told him to keep driving. He had 2 daughters waiting at home, responsibilities, a life that didn't include stopping for strangers at midnight. But there was something deeper, a familiar pain he had carried in his chest for 4 long years since losing his wife. He knew exactly what it felt like to be completely alone in the dark. He rolled down the window and shouted through the rain, "Ma'am, are you okay? The buses stopped running hours ago." The woman slowly turned her head toward him. Her face was lined with deep sadness. Her eyes held the vacant look of someone who had long given up hope. Her silver hair hung in wet strands around her weathered cheeks. "I'm fine," she replied in a voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm just waiting." Marcus parked the truck and stepped out, his work boots splashing puddles on the pavement. Up close, he could see that she was shivering, though he didn't know if it was from the cold or something much deeper. He crouched to meet her eyes. "My name is Marcus," he said gently. "What's your name?" She was silent for a long moment that felt endless. "Eleanor Pierce," she finally whispered. "Just Eleanor." "Mrs. Eleanor, it's almost midnight and this rain isn't stopping. Do you have anywhere to go? Anyone you can call?" Her laugh was hollow and bitter, like glass breaking in an empty room. "There's no one to call. No place that wants me." She drew back from him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please just leave me alone. I've made peace with sitting here." Those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In her voice, he heard echoes of his own darkest moments, the nights he'd sat in his truck in empty parking lots, wondering how he could go on. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said softly, removing his jacket and placing it over her trembling shoulders, "I have twin daughters at home. They're 9 now and they've taught me something important. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let someone help us." He paused, studying her face under the flickering streetlight. "Come home with me tonight. Just for tonight. Let me take you somewhere warm and dry." "I can't," her voice cracked like old parchment. "I'd only be a burden. Look at me. I can barely manage this old wheelchair, and I haven't been anyone's responsibility in years. You have daughters to care for." Marcus knelt beside her wheelchair, the rain soaking his shirt. For a moment, he was transported 4 years back to a hospital room where the machines constantly beeped, and his wife Amelia's hand had gone cold in his. "My daughters lost their mother when they were 5. A brain tumor. I've been trying to be strong enough for the 3 of us ever since. But you know what I've learned? Sometimes we need each other more than we think." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "Your wife. I'm so sorry." "Thank you," Marcus said, standing and extending his hand with gentle determination. "Now please." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the constant drum of rain on the concrete. Mrs. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand as if it were impossible, something she didn't deserve. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why help someone like me?" Marcus's throat tightened. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone in the dark. Because Amelia would never forgive me if I drove past someone who needs help. Because my daughters need to see that kindness still exists in this world." Instead, he simply said, "Because it's the right thing to do." After what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Eleanor finally allowed Marcus to help her into his truck. Her wheelchair folded easily into the back with practiced ease. And as they drove through the quiet suburban streets, she pressed against the passenger window as if trying to disappear completely. "You should tell me something," she said suddenly in that hollow voice. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but his voice remained gentle. "What were you waiting for, Mrs. Eleanor?" She stayed silent so long Marcus thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her words were barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I was waiting for it to end. I thought maybe if I just sat there long enough in the cold and rain." Her voice faded, but the implication hung heavy in the air between them. Marcus parked at his driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved. The rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof of the truck, creating a cocoon of intimacy that made honest words possible. "I understand that darkness," Marcus said quietly, looking at the cheerful yellow siding of his house. "After Amelia died, there were nights I sat in my truck wondering how I could go on. The only thing that kept me here was knowing that Clara and Ruby needed me." "But you had a reason to stay," whispered Mrs. Eleanor, her voice broken. "I have nothing. No children, no grandchildren. My husband Harold died in a car accident 10 years ago, the same crash that put me in this wheelchair. We were married 40 years and we never had children. Not by choice but," she shrugged helplessly. "When Harold died, he took my entire world with him." Marcus turned to look at her, seeing the depth of a decade of grief etched into her features. "What about other family? Friends? Harold was an only child and I lost my parents when I was young. We had each other and that was enough, until it wasn't." The laugh that followed was bitter. "I worked at the library for 40 years. But when you retire and have nowhere to go home to, those connections fade fast. People have their own lives, their own families." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Marcus knew what it meant to feel utterly alone, even when surrounded by people who cared. The weight of single parenthood had nearly crushed him more than once. "Mrs. Eleanor, now you have something. You have us. If you want it." She looked at him with eyes that had long forgotten hope. "You don't know what you're saying. I'm 70, paralyzed, with nothing to offer your family except problems." "Let us decide what you have to offer," Marcus said softly. "Come in, meet my daughters, have some warm tea and a bed for the night. Tomorrow we can figure out the rest." Marcus's home was a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch that looked inviting even in the dark. Inside, the living room told the story of a single father's life: scattered schoolwork on the coffee table, small shoes by the door, and family photos covering every available surface. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes immediately went to a large portrait above the fireplace. A beautiful woman with kind eyes and the same gentle smile as Marcus, flanked by 2 identical girls with pigtails and missing teeth. "Amelia," Marcus said softly, following her gaze. "That photo was taken about 6 months before she got sick." Mrs. Eleanor studied the photo with the careful attention of someone who understood loss. "She looks like she was a wonderful mother." "She was," Marcus's voice thick with emotion. "She used to say the secret to raising good children was showing them how to notice when others need help. I think about that a lot." He helped Mrs. Eleanor navigate the doorway, her wheelchair moving smoothly over the wooden floors. "Let me get you some dry clothes and show you the guest room. Are you hungry?" She shook her head, overwhelmed by the warmth of this stranger's home. "I should leave in the morning. I don't want to impose on your family." "You're not imposing," Marcus assured her, though something in his eyes told him she had already decided to sneak away before dawn. The guest room was simple but cozy, with a comfortable bed, cheerful curtains, and more family photos on the dresser. Marcus brought her a warm robe and left her to change. But Mrs. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window in her wheelchair, watching the rain streak the glass and thinking of Harold. He would have loved Marcus's kindness, would have insisted on helping somehow if their roles had been reversed. But Harold was gone, and she had spent 10 years learning to live with that emptiness. Except tonight felt different. Tonight, for the first time in a decade, she was inside a home that breathed life and love. The walls held the laughter of children, bedtime stories, birthday parties, and all the beautiful chaos of a real family. She had forgotten how that felt. Marcus woke at 5:30 a.m. as always, his internal clock tuned to the demands of single parenthood. As he descended the stairs to make coffee, he found Mrs. Eleanor already awake, sitting in her wheelchair by the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint her backyard gold. Clearly, she had tried to sneak away before the family woke, but something had stopped her. Her overnight bag was packed beside her chair, but she made no move toward the door. "Good morning," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Coffee?" She nodded gratefully, accepting the steaming cup with trembling hands. "I should go soon before your daughters wake up. I don't want to confuse them or complicate things." Marcus moved efficiently around the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the fridge. "Actually, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. My daughters would never forgive me if I let a guest leave without trying my famous pancakes." "Marcus, you don't understand." Mrs. Eleanor's voice carried the weight of someone who had disappointed too many people. "I'm not good with children anymore. It's been so long and they'll have questions I don't know how to answer." "Kids are more understanding than we give them credit for," Marcus said, starting to mix the batter. Clara and Ruby have had to understand more than most kids their age. At the mention of their names, the sound of little feet running down the stairs filled the air. Two identical 9-year-old girls burst into the kitchen, their faces glowing with the kind of energy that only comes with youth and Saturday mornings. They stopped in their tracks when they saw Mrs. Eleanor, expressions shifting from surprise to curiosity without a hint of fear or judgment. "Daddy, who is she?" Clara asked with the blunt honesty only children possess. "This is Mrs. Eleanor," Marcus explained, flipping pancakes on the stove. "She's having breakfast with us." "Are you okay?" Ruby asked, her young face creased with genuine concern at the sight of the wheelchair. "Did you get hurt?" Mrs. Eleanor's breath caught. When was the last time someone had asked if she was okay? When was the last time someone had looked at her with simple, honest concern instead of pity or discomfort? "A long time ago," she said softly, surprised by the gentleness in her own voice. "Our mommy got hurt too," Clara said naturally, climbing onto the chair next to Mrs. Eleanor. "But Daddy says she's watching over us from heaven now, and she's proud of how strong we are." The simple, innocent words hit Mrs. Eleanor like a physical blow. These girls, so young, had already experienced more loss than many adults. Yet here they were, bright and affectionate, accepting her presence without question. "I'm sure she's very proud of both of you," Mrs. Eleanor managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Ruby joined her sister at the table, chatting about their weekend plans. "We're going to help Daddy rake leaves today. Do you want to help? You could supervise us and make sure we don't miss any spots." I'm not sure I'd be much help," she replied, but something warm was spreading in her chest, a feeling she had nearly forgotten existed. Marcus served breakfast with the practiced efficiency of years of parenting, and something magical began to unfold around the kitchen table. For the first time in 10 years, Mrs. Eleanor found herself part of a family meal. The girls naturally included her in conversation, asking about her life, her work at the library, her favorite books. When Clara spilled syrup on her pajama shirt, Mrs. Eleanor instinctively reached out with a napkin, cleaning the mess with the gentle touch of someone who had always longed to be a mother. "You're good at that," Clara observed. "Daddy always uses too much water and makes it worse." "Hey!" Marcus protested in mock indignation, and both girls dissolved into giggles. Mrs. Eleanor found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. The sound of children's laughter, the comfortable chaos of a family breakfast, the simple act of being needed, even in such a small way, awakened something in her she thought had died with Harold. When Ruby mentioned struggling with a Monday math problem, Mrs. Eleanor found herself leaning forward with interest. "What kind of math problem?" she asked. Ruby ran upstairs and returned with her math notebook, showing Mrs. Eleanor a page of word problems that had clearly been frustrating her. "I just don't understand what they're asking," Ruby sighed, sounding far too mature for her 9 years. Mrs. Eleanor studied the problem carefully, then began guiding Ruby through it with surprising patience. "Let's break it into smaller pieces. What do we know for sure and what are we trying to figure out?" Marcus watched this exchange with growing warmth. Since Amelia's death, he had carried every burden alone. Homework help, scraped knees, bedtime stories, worried nights when the girls had fevers. Having someone else naturally step into that supportive role felt like a lifeline he hadn't realized he desperately needed. "You're really good at this," Ruby said admiringly when the problem finally made sense. "Were you a teacher?" "I worked at the library for 40 years, Mrs. Eleanor replied. "I always loved helping children with reading and homework. Some of my favorite memories are Saturday mornings when families came together and I helped kids find just the right book for their reading level." "That sounds really nice," Clara said nostalgically. "I love the library, but we don't go very often because Daddy is always busy with work and taking care of us." The admission hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus studied her face, seeing the vulnerability beneath her carefully composed exterior. After breakfast, as the girls ran upstairs to get dressed for their day of leaf raking, Marcus sat across from Mrs. Eleanor at the now quiet table. "So," he said gently, "would you tell me what really brought you to that bus stop last night?" Now, this is where everything changes. Mrs. Eleanor finally broke down. The careful mask she had worn during breakfast dissolved, and Marcus saw the raw pain beneath, 10 years of grief and loneliness that had been consuming her soul. "Harold and I tried to have children for 20 years, she whispered, her voice broken. "The doctors couldn't explain why it never happened. We went through treatments, tests, procedures that left us emotionally and financially drained. Eventually, we accepted that it would just be the two of us. And that was okay. Harold was enough. He was everything." Marcus waited, sensing there was more, something darker she was gathering the courage to share. The night of the accident, Harold was driving when we got into an argument. The words came quickly as if she had to get them out fast. Something stupid about money, whether we could afford to fix the roof. I was so angry, so stubborn. I didn't even say goodbye before we left the driveway. We were on that stretch of road outside town when the brakes failed. The car went out of control, left the road, and crashed into a tree. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. The police said he died instantly when the drunk driver hit us. But I lived. I woke up in the hospital 30 days later, paralyzed from the waist down, and he was already buried. I missed my own husband's funeral because I was unconscious. Marcus felt his heart tighten. The guilt she must have carried all these years, the survivor's guilt compounded by regret over their final conversation. Mrs. Eleanor, the accident wasn't your fault. Marital arguments, that's just marriage. Harold knew you loved him. Did he? Her eyes were wild with pain. The last words I spoke to him were angry. For 10 years I've lived with that. 10 years of waking every morning wishing I had died in that car instead of him. The raw honesty of her confession filled the kitchen with heavy silence. Upstairs, the girls could be heard preparing for the day, their voices a joyful counterpoint to the grief being shared below. Last night, Mrs. Eleanor continued, barely above a whisper, was the 10th anniversary of the accident. I went to his grave first. Sat there for hours talking to a headstone, apologizing for things that couldn't be undone. Then I went to that bus stop and I just wanted it to end. I thought maybe if I sat there long enough in the cold rain. I was trying to. Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. I was ready to give up, she said simply. I had nothing left to give the world, nothing to offer anyone. I've been a burden to myself for a decade. Why impose that on anyone else? Marcus leaned forward, his voice intense. Mrs. Eleanor, look at me. What happened this morning at breakfast? That wasn't the behavior of someone who has nothing to offer. Ruby understood math for the first time in weeks because of your patience. Clara felt safe and cared for because of your gentle presence. And he paused, struggling to articulate something he had barely admitted to himself. I haven't had help with anything in 4 years. Real help. Everyone sees me as the capable single dad who has it all under control. But the truth is, most days I'm barely holding on. Having you here this morning, seeing you naturally step in to help with homework, seeing my daughters respond to your kindness, reminded me what it feels like not to carry every burden alone. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him through her tears. You're just being kind. You really don't need. I need you, Marcus said firmly. My daughters need you. We're not a complete family, Mrs. Eleanor. We are 3 people who love each other but are missing something essential. Amelia's death left a hole I can't fill alone, no matter how hard I try. The sound of the girls coming downstairs interrupted the intensity of the moment. They burst into the kitchen, wearing old clothes and carrying rakes too large for their small bodies. Are you coming outside to help us? Ruby asked Mrs. Eleanor hopefully. Mrs. Eleanor looked at Marcus, then at the 2 bright faces waiting for her response. For the first time in 10 years, someone needed her, not out of obligation or pity, but from genuine desire for her company. I think I'd like that, she said softly. The following hours passed in a blur of autumn activity that felt almost surreal to Mrs. Eleanor. She positioned her wheelchair strategically around the yard, directing the girls' leaf-raking efforts and offering encouragement when their enthusiasm waned. Miss Eleanor, you're really good at supervising, Clara declared, dragging a rake through a particularly stubborn pile of leaves. I never had children to practice on, Mrs. Eleanor replied, but I supervised many young volunteers at the library over the years. Marcus worked quietly nearby, stealing glances at the interaction between his daughters and this woman who had appeared in their lives so unexpectedly. There was something natural about the way she engaged with the girls, without overdoing it, without overwhelming them with attention, just being genuinely present and involved. When Ruby accidentally raked leaves onto Mrs. Eleanor's wheelchair, she immediately looked distressed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, she said. It's perfectly fine, Mrs. Eleanor laughed, brushing the leaves from her lap. They're just leaves, dear. They come off easily. But I made a mess of you, Ruby said, her bottom lip trembling with dramatic 9-year-old emotion. Mrs. Eleanor reached out and took Ruby's small hand in hers, worn from years of life. Ruby, do you see this ring on my finger? Ruby nodded, studying the simple gold band. It belonged to my husband, Harold. He used to garden every weekend and was always covered in dirt, leaves and grass stains. I used to scold him for tracking mud through the house. Her voice softened with the memory. I'd give anything now to clean up one more muddy footprint, to remove one more leaf from his clothes. Messes made by people you care about, those aren't really messes at all. They're just signs that life is being lived. Ruby beamed and threw her arms around Mrs. Eleanor's neck in a spontaneous hug, nearly bringing the elderly woman to tears. I like you, she whispered into her ear. I hope you stay a long time. Across the yard, Marcus watched the exchange with a growing sense that something had fallen perfectly into place. His daughters were genuinely, purely happy in a way they hadn't been since Amelia had gotten sick. And Mrs. Eleanor, the hollow despair of the previous night had been replaced with something approaching peace. As the afternoon progressed, Mrs. Eleanor found herself doing things she hadn't done in years. She helped the girls make piles of leaves, supervised their leaps into them from the porch steps, and even laughed when Clara emerged from a particularly large pile with leaves in her hair and a wide grin. You should jump too, Miss Eleanor, Clara encouraged. I don't think my wheelchair would handle that very well, Mrs. Eleanor said, laughing. That's okay, Ruby said naturally. There are lots of things we can't do, but that doesn't mean we can't have fun. The simple wisdom of a 9-year-old hit Mrs. Eleanor with unexpected force. When had she stopped believing that happiness was possible despite limitations? When had she convinced herself that her wheelchair defined what she could or couldn't experience? As the afternoon drew to a close and they returned inside, Marcus began preparing dinner with the same efficient routine he had maintained for 4 years. Mrs. Eleanor watched him, noting the practiced way he multitasked, stirring pasta while helping Clara with a homework question. They worked together with surprising ease. Mrs. Eleanor handled the vegetables from her seated position while Marcus managed the stove. The girls set the table, chatting about their day and filling the kitchen with the comfortable chaos of family life. During dinner, something shifted. Conversation flowed naturally, with Mrs. Eleanor sharing stories from her years at the library and the girls reciprocating with tales of school and friends. Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't since Amelia's death. Miss Eleanor, do you have somewhere you need to be tomorrow? Clara asked. The question hung in the air, charged with possibility and hope. Mrs. Eleanor looked around the table at the 3 faces that had become so dear to her in less than 24 hours. No, dear, she said softly. I don't have anywhere I need to be. That's great, Ruby said with satisfaction. Because we want to show you our favorite park and Daddy promised we could go to the library this week, and we still need help with our science project. Marcus watched his daughters casually plan a future that included Mrs. Eleanor, and something loosened in his chest. For 4 years, he had carried the full weight of being everything for his daughters. But perhaps, just perhaps, he no longer had to do it alone. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Marcus and Mrs. Eleanor sat in the living room with cups of tea. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor said suddenly. For what? For saving my life last night. And I don't just mean from the rain. Marcus remained silent for a long moment. Mrs. Eleanor, can I tell you something? I think maybe you saved us too. A year passed like a beautiful dream that Mrs. Eleanor kept expecting to end. But instead of fading, her bond with the Marcus family only grew stronger. She never returned to that bus stop. Instead, she became an integral part of a home that had desperately needed her presence without even knowing it. The transformation was gradual but profound. Mrs. Eleanor's days, once filled endlessly with memories and regret, became full of purpose and joy. She helped the girls with homework every afternoon, taught them Harold's favorite cookie recipes, and became their confidant for big and small problems alike. For Marcus, having Mrs. Eleanor there was a revelation he hadn't anticipated. The crushing weight of single parenthood began to lift as he discovered what it truly meant to share the responsibility of raising his daughters. Have you been thinking, Marcus said one night while they watched the girls play in the yard from the porch, about making this official? I mean legally. I'd like to adopt you into the family. Mrs. Eleanor's breath caught. Marcus, you don't have to. I want to, he said firmly. The girls need you. I need you. You're no longer a guest here, Mrs. Eleanor. You're family. You've been family since that first breakfast. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. I never imagined. At 71, I never thought I'd have a family again. Age doesn't matter when it comes to love, Marcus said gently. Amelia always said that. Family isn't just blood. It's choosing each other every day. The girls ran to the porch, flushed with excitement. What are you two talking about? Clara demanded. We're talking about something very important, Marcus said, drawing both girls onto his lap. How would you feel if Miss Eleanor became your official grandmother? The squeal of joy from the twins probably carried 3 houses down the street. Really? Ruby gasped. She'd really be our grandma? If she wants to be, Marcus said, looking at Mrs. Eleanor with questioning eyes. Mrs. Eleanor reached out and took the hands of both girls in hers. I would be honored to be your grandmother. All my life, I wanted to be someone's grandmother. The legal process was simple, but the emotional significance was immeasurable. On a sunny spring day, Mrs. Eleanor officially became Grandma Eleanor to Clara and Ruby Marcus. Years flowed by in a rhythm of school events, family dinners, holiday celebrations, and quiet moments that built the foundation of genuine love. Mrs. Eleanor taught the girls about resilience, finding joy in small moments, and the strength that comes from surviving life's cruelest disappointments. The girls taught her about hope, laughter that comes from the belly, and the possibility of new beginnings at any age. Marcus found his own healing as he watched his improvised family thrive. The isolating weight of single parenthood became a shared journey of growth and discovery. Grandma Eleanor's wheelchair became as much a part of the household as Marcus's work boots by the door or the girls' artwork covering the refrigerator. The house that once echoed with hollow loss now resonated with genuine happiness. When the twins turned 16, they threw a surprise birthday party for Grandma Eleanor's 80th. The living room was decorated with handmade banners, and they presented a photo album documenting their 7 years together as a family. I never imagined, Mrs. Eleanor whispered, clutching the album to her chest, that my 80th year would be among the happiest of my life. You saved us, Grandma Eleanor, Clara said, using the name that had become as natural as breathing. You saved all of us. By the time the girls were 17, they had grown into remarkable, compassionate, resilient young women, wise beyond their years. They spoke of their mother with love instead of only sadness, and they couldn't imagine life without the grandmother who had chosen them as much as they had chosen her. The day came when both girls received their university acceptance letters, Clara to study education, inspired by Mrs. Eleanor's patient teaching, and Ruby to pursue engineering, following in Marcus's footsteps. I can't believe my babies are going to college, Mrs. Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. At 78, she was still vibrant, her eyes shining with the life that had returned 9 years earlier. You'll always be our grandmother, Clara assured her, hugging the woman who had become the heart of their family. Distance won't change that. Marcus, now 43 with strands of silver in his hair, watched his daughters console the woman who had saved them all. Mrs. Eleanor, you know this will always be your home, right? Whether the girls are here or not. She nodded, tears flowing freely. You gave me a family when I thought I had lost everything. You taught me that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. 9 years after that rainy November night, Marcus and Mrs. Eleanor sat together on the porch, as they had countless times before. The girls were away at their respective universities but called every Sunday without fail, filling their grandmother with every detail of their lives. Do you ever think about that night at the bus stop? Marcus asked quietly. Every day, Mrs. Eleanor replied, her voice strong and peaceful. I was so ready to give up. I thought my story was over. Maybe that's when your real story began, Marcus suggested. All our real stories. Mrs. Eleanor smiled, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 9 years ago, I was convinced I had nothing left to give the world. No. She glanced at Marcus's hand, which she held gently in her own. I see that the world had plenty left for me and I had plenty left to give. I just needed a family to remind me. And in that moment, on the quiet porch of a home that had once been lonely, they all understood what it truly meant to survive tragedy. Not just to live but to find love again in whatever form it comes and to hold it tightly, never letting go.